In 1981, 4 people, including 2 children, were bound, stabbed, and bludgeoned to death inside a remote California cabin. Investigators found the murder weapons 35 years later, buried in a suspect's backyard. And somehow, no one has ever been convicted. This is the story of Cabin 28, and why the truth may have been deliberately buried in more ways than one. But before we get to the cover-up, you need to understand what happened inside that cabin. And I promise you, it's worse than you think. Keddie, California. Population, fewer than 100 people. A tiny, forgotten resort community nestled in the Sierra Nevada mountains of Plumas County, about 80 miles northwest of Reno. By 1981, Keddie was well past its prime, a cluster of aging cabins originally built in the 1930s as vacation rentals, now repurposed as low-income housing. It was the kind of place people ended up when they had nowhere else to go. Glenda Sue Sharp, known to everyone as Sue, was one of those people. A 36-year-old mother of 5, she had recently fled an abusive marriage and relocated her family to Cabin 28 in the Keddie Resort. Life was hard, money was tight, but she was starting over. Her children ranged in age from 5 to 15. On the night of April 11, 1981, the cabin was full. Sue was home with her sons John, 15, and Rick, 10, her daughters Tina, 12, and Greg, 5, plus John's friend Dana Wingate, 17, who was sleeping over. 2 additional friends of the family, Justin and his younger brother, were also staying the night. By the next morning, 3 of those people would be dead in the living room. And 12-year-old Tina would be gone without a trace. So what happened during those dark hours in the mountains? Here's where the nightmare begins. On the morning of April 12, 1981, a 14-year-old boy who had been sleeping in an adjacent bedroom opened the door to the living room of Cabin 28 and walked into a scene out of a horror film. Sue Sharp, her son John, and his friend Dana Wingate were dead. Their bodies showed evidence of extreme violence. They had been bound with medical tape and electrical cord, then attacked with at least 2 weapons, a hammer and a knife, later determined to be a Kabar-style military blade. The Plumas County Sheriff's Office would document that Sue had been stabbed at least 17 times. John and Dana had suffered massive blunt force trauma in addition to stab wounds. A bent butcher knife was found at the scene, bent from the sheer force of the attack. Here's what makes this case so haunting. 3 younger children, Rick, age 10, Greg, age 5, and Justin, were asleep in the back bedroom the entire time. They survived. They told investigators they heard muffled screams and thumps during the night but were too terrified to open the door. They were feet away from a triple homicide and didn't know it until morning. But there was a 4th victim. 12-year-old Tina Sharp was missing from the cabin entirely. Her bed had been slept in. There was no sign of her. She had been taken. Now, in a community of fewer than 100 people, you'd think someone saw something. You'd think evidence would lead somewhere fast. And you'd be wrong. The investigation was troubled from the very first hours. The Plumas County Sheriff's Office in 1981 was a small rural department, and this was unlike anything they had ever handled. The crime scene was not properly secured. Residents of the Keddie Resort reportedly walked through the cabin before it was fully processed. Critical forensic evidence was either poorly collected or, as later investigations would allege, not collected at all. But there were suspects. Almost immediately, suspicion fell on 2 men, Martin Smart and John Bo Bubaid. Smart was a neighbor. He lived in Cabin 26, just steps from Cabin 28, with his wife Marilyn. Bubaid was his friend and roommate. Both men had criminal histories. Both were known to drink heavily. And here's a critical detail: Martin Smart's wife, Marilyn, reportedly told a therapist that her husband had confessed to the murders. She later provided a sealed letter to her counselor describing what Martin had told her. So the question becomes, if there was a confession, if there were known suspects living next door, why was no one ever arrested? What would you have done with that information? The answer lies in a catastrophic chain of investigative failures. Over the following years, key evidence from the case went missing from the sheriff's department. In 2004, Cabin 28 itself was demolished by the property owners, effectively destroying the physical crime scene forever. The original case files were disorganized, incomplete, and in some cases contradictory. Martin Smart died in 2000. Bobu Bade died in 1988. Both went to their graves without ever being charged. But the story of Tina Sharp adds another devastating layer. For 3 years, her fate was unknown. Then, in April 1984, a bottle collector stumbled upon a human skull near Camp 18, a remote area in Butte County nearly 100 miles from Keddie. Further searches recovered additional skeletal remains. Dental records confirmed what the Sharp family had feared: it was Tina. She was 12 years old when she was taken. The cause and exact manner of her death could not be determined due to decomposition, but the location suggested she had been transported alive from the cabin before being killed elsewhere. Think about that. Someone carried a child out of a cabin where 3 people had just been massacred, past the bodies, past the sleeping children, and drove her into the mountains. Then came the breakthrough no one expected. In 2016, the case was reopened under new investigators. Working with surviving family members and modern forensic techniques, they obtained a search warrant for the backyard of a home in Reno, Nevada, a property once rented by Martin Smart. Buried in the yard, they found a hammer and a knife consistent with the weapons described in the original 1981 crime scene reports. DNA testing was conducted, but the results have never been made fully public. The Plumas County District Attorney reviewed the findings. And still, no charges were filed. So here we are, more than 4 decades later. 4 people dead. A cabin demolished. Evidence lost, destroyed, or buried in a backyard. A reported confession that never led to an arrest. 2 prime suspects who died as free men. And a justice system that, despite multiple opportunities, never brought anyone to trial. The surviving Sharp children have spent their entire adult lives fighting for answers. Sheila Sharp, Sue's eldest daughter, who was at a sleepover the night of the murders and returned home to find her family destroyed, has become one of the most vocal advocates for the case. She has stated publicly that she believes she knows who killed her family and that the evidence exists to prove it. But here's the question that keeps investigators and researchers up at night: was this simply incompetence, a small-town department overwhelmed by a horrific crime, or was there something more deliberate at work? Why was the cabin demolished? Why did evidence vanish from custody? Why were the buried weapons not enough? Some researchers believe the case was solvable within the first year. Others believe it was unsolvable the moment the crime scene was compromised. And a growing number believe it was never meant to be solved at all. What do you think really happened inside Cabin 28? And more importantly, why has no one ever paid for it? The Keddie Cabin Murders remain one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in American history, not because the killers are unknown, but because the answers may have been within reach all along. If this case haunts you the way it haunts us, leave your theory in the comments below. Like this video if you want us to cover more cases like this. And subscribe to Obscura Files, because some doors, once opened, can never be closed. We'll see you in the next one.